Kristen Atchison here, and we're talking about memory and the various parts of the brain that are involved in memory. So, to kind of talk about all the stuff we're going to talk about in more detail, the frontal lobes and the hippocampus are really important for explicit memory formation. Remember, explicit memories are knowing that, something that you have to effortlessly process to remember and recall. Okay, so those are the things, things that you learn, things about your life, things like that. Those would be explicit memories. And again, those are in the frontal lobes and the hippocampus. The cerebellum and the basal ganglia are important for implicit memory formation. So that's more like the knowing how, remember? So things like riding your bike or driving, things like that you're not actually thinking about, the things we learn through classical conditioning, these kinds of things, these are happening in the much older brain structures, again, of the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. Remember, the evolution of the brain is we have it evolved from the bottom and the back forward. So our frontal lobes are our newest area of the brain, evolutionary speaking, whereas the cerebellum and the basal ganglia are going to be much, much older. And you can see this in the different kinds of memories that they're responsible for too. So an explicit memory is going to be a lot more of a complex memory than something like an implicit memory is going to be. Amygdala. The amygdala is involved with emotion-related memory. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more too. And you can see here the amygdala is kind of this purple area. So it's also older. It's going to be part of that limbic system as well. And so it also is something that we can see in animal models as well. Okay, so explicit memories first, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is really involved in this for both explicit and conscious memories. These can either be semantic, and this is the kinds of stuff like education, right? The stuff we learn in education would be those semantic memories. So facts and general knowledge, when you memorize a definition, when you learn what explicit memory is, when you learn what semantic memory is, that's a semantic memory. It's knowing that, right? The episodic memory is going to be more about episodes of our life. Again, nobody's trying to trick anybody with the naming of these things. Our episodic memories are about episodes of our personally experienced events, okay? So think of it kind of like if your life was a TV show, the different episodes, the different things that have happened to you really are a kind of explicit memory as well, and they're called episodic memory. And the hippocampus really acts as like a loading dock for these kinds of memories. So the hippocampus is an older structure, but it's the loading dock to put it into the frontal lobes, okay? So we said that the frontal lobes are really important in these explicit memories. They're going through the hippocampus though, okay? So the hippocampus is kind of where they're getting into the system to be able to store them later. So if you think about, a loading dock in terms of a warehouse or something like that, that's the first place those materials go when they get offloaded off the truck. They go onto the loading dock. And then they get further distributed into the warehouse, into the store, wherever. It's the same thing with explicit memories. The hippocampus is the first place they go in the brain, and then later go further in to the frontal lobes. So explicit memories, again, are being processed first through the hippocampus. Here's an image of the brain. The orange structure that's highlighted here is the hippocampus. And again, this is this loading dock that's feeding it into the other brain regions in the frontal lobes, especially for memory storage. So memories migrate, so that means they're moving, right, from the hippocampus to other areas of the brain for storage and consolidation. This happens in both the right and the left frontal lobes. It's not just happening in one side or the other, but just like we talked about with brain lateralization, different information is being stored in different parts, okay? So we'll see that there are different sides of the brain that are important in this. one thing that we know about this, this memory consolidation where they're going for long-term storage in the frontal lobe is that sleeping is a really important component of this. They can see both hippocampus and cortex activity during sleep. There's also behavioral studies where they've had participants try and learn something, and then half the participants took a nap and half of the participants didn't, and the participants that took a nap better remembered the material than the participants that didn't. So the idea to stay up all night cramming is really bad study technique for two reasons. One, we know that cramming's bad because it's not good practice. It's not distributed practice, which we know is what's important. Distributed rehearsal is what's important for good long-term memories, but it's also not helping your brain any. That memory consolidation process isn't happening if you're not getting a good night's sleep. So again, both of those things are going to be important for memory, for really good memories, and to then hopefully learn the materials. Okay, so the implicit memories, again, are being processed in the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. And again, these are older brain structures. The cerebellum, remember, is that kind of what looks like a little mini brain at the back of your brain, at the rear of the brainstem. And it's really important for those memories that are related to more like this classical conditioning. So this associative learning is happening there. Again, because classical conditioning is involving all of those involuntary kind of behaviors, the cerebellum plays a role in that, and so they're going to be storing that information there as well. Whereas the basal ganglia is really important for those physical memories, those kind of muscle memories. So knowing how to ride a bike, it's hard to tell somebody how you ride a bike because that's something you implicitly know how to do. Your body knows how to do, but that's something that you're doing on the explicit level unless you're trying to teach somebody. You're doing it implicitly. These sorts of things. Again, so these physical skills are here in the basal ganglia. And the last area of the brain that we're going to talk about is the amygdala. So the amygdala is really, really important for emotional memories. So if you think about any kind of really heightened emotional experience that you have, whether it's good or bad, is going to trigger stress hormones, okay? So regardless of whether it's good stress or bad stress, stress hormones are being secreted, and that really turns the amygdala on to boost that memory forming, those memory forming areas. So it basically, those hormones kind of can be like a switch that turns on the amygdala to boost the activity in forming memories. So this really results in this kind of these memories being formed kind of with or without conscious awareness. So this can both be implicit or explicit. We'll see that this is going to be, when we talk about disorders, that we're going to see that people that have PTSD often have really active amygdalas. And so this can heighten their ability to get PTSD because these emotional events are being heightened or being boosted. Now, this is not the case for everybody, but it can be a contributing factor. This also explains things like flashbulb memories, where you have a clear memory of an emotionally significant event. So you hear different major events in U.S. history often can be flashbulb. We can have flashbulb memories for us, where we were when we heard this thing happened, exactly what we were doing when we heard this thing happened. So my mom always described having this flashbulb memory for where she was when President Kennedy was assassinated, where she was when she heard about that information and she saw that information. She had a really strong emotional reaction to that. And so she had this flashbulb memory of it. I was in college when 9/11 happened. I have a flashbulb memory of that. I know exactly what I was texting with one of my high school friends on AOL Instant Messenger, to date myself. And he said, hey, this has happened. And I turned on my TV and I watched the rest of it unfold. I think the first plane had gone through, but the second plane hadn't. And so I saw the second plane crash into the Twin Tower on my TV in my apartment in college. And I remember exactly where everything was. It was a really small room. And so my TV was in my closet. And I was sitting on my bed and I was going back and forth between typing to my friends and watching this. And I have a really, really vivid memory of that. I don't remember much else from the rest of the day, but I have a really vivid memory of when I first saw that. And again, that's going to be because of that amygdala boosting that brain activity. It triggered those emotions. It triggered those hormonal changes. And then it's retained because both my mom and I have continued to talk about these things. You say things like, where were you? What was happening? What you were doing when these kinds of things, when you found out these kinds of really emotionally laden news. And so then it continues to be retained because of rehearsal. So that ends our conversation about memory and the brain.